Hey everyone! Welcome back to Divi Mobi First. In this tutorial, I'll show you how to use CSS classes with jQuery to create this really cool tab switcher layout. You can use this layout for clients or your own business. It's fully responsive and you can pretty much put it anywhere you want. We'll show you how we managed to make the spinning arrowhead and where you can get these awesome animations for free. So let's begin. First, let's examine the structure of this current layout. We used a specialty section container, the second to last arrangement from the selectable options. On the left side, we have 4 blurbs that will act as our trigger, and on the right side, we have 4 rows that will house our content. When the blurb is clicked, it will unhide its respective row container, but at the same time, it will hide any other container that was previously opened. All right, let's start a new project. Choose your specialty section container of choice, and let's add our first trigger module. I prefer using a blurb. Let's edit the title and remove the default paragraph text. We'll add a subtitle later, but for now, let's leave it blank. Let's switch it to a blurb with an icon and then select your icon. Next, let's go over to the Design tab and give the icon a color, and also a background color if you want. Let's set the placement to left. And let's give it a size of, let's say, 16 pixels. Change the border radius to 100% and add about 8 pixels to the icon padding. Next, add a bottom margin and some padding to the left and right, F the module. I'll put 20 pixels for the bottom margin and 15 pixels for the padding. Of course, you are free to add whatever style you want. Now let's add our row. I'm going to use the 2-column arrangement, and on the left, you can insert whatever module you want. In my case, I will add another blurb module, but this time I'm going to remove the image. For the second column, I will just add an image module and leave the placeholder for now. Remember, all this can change. You can put whatever you want inside the row container. It really doesn't matter. Okay, let's get the ball rolling with our CSS and jQuery. Now, the idea is, when the page loads, we only want the first row to be seen. All rows, including the ones we're going to add after, should be hidden. So let's add a full-width section to the bottom of our page to hold our CSS styles and jQuery code. Our first block will hold our CSS, and the second one will hold our jQuery code. Let's add a CSS class that would be responsible for hiding the rows. Let's create a class called .hide and give it display none property. To render this style property, we need to add it inside a style tag, or better yet, you can add it to the page settings, custom CSS. However, for this demonstration, we're going to add it to our code module. Now let's go over to our jQuery script generator and see how we can start adding functionality. What we want to do is unhide the hidden row when the blurb module is clicked. In other words, we want to remove the class.hide when an element is clicked. Here is the code. The element we want to click will be given the ID called target. Let's rename this to trigger-1. The class to remove is the hide class, which will be added to our content row. Therefore, the ID called something would be the ID for that row container. Let's call it something else, like content-1. The code reads like this. When the trigger module is clicked, a function is called that removes the class hide from the element with the class content-1. So, copy this code and paste it into our jQuery code block inside a script tag. Now let's add the IDs and the class to the elements. You can already see that our style is working. Nice! Let's save and go over to our preview page and refresh. It's working! Great! So let's fix the code so that the content appears when we click it again. Let's try a new method called toggle class. Let's save it and test it out again. Awesome! Okay, let's add another blurb and row. Let's rename the second trigger ID to trigger-2 and the second content row ID to content-2. Now, copy the jQuery code and modify it to accommodate the second tab. Save your project and let's put it to the test. And there it is. But this is not what we really want, is it? We want to hide all other rows when we click on any of the other triggers. To do that, we need to make some changes to our code. Let's create a function that adds the hide class to each row that has the word content as its ID whenever a trigger is clicked. Let me show you what I mean. Each row contains the prefix content, followed by a dash and a unique identification number. The same can be said for the trigger module, in that each trigger ID must have a corresponding content ID, with a unique identifying number shared by both. So let's create this function and call it hideAll. This function will scan the page for any element whose ID begins with the word content. We can accomplish this using a technique known as regular expressions. So for each ID found with the starting word content, the class hide will be added to each of those row elements. Now let's change the content on the second row so we can see if it's really working. All right, let's put our layout to the test and see what happens. Nice. Congratulations on making it this far. I'm taking it step by step so you can learn as we go. You can even implement some of the earlier stages as its own standalone feature in another project as well. Now, the code is working, but it is not practical. We would have to return to the jQuery code and manually add each selector and a click function for each new trigger module we add. Let's change the code so we never have to do this again. First, let's write our pseudocode. When a trigger element is clicked, we want to hide all content that needs to be hidden. Then we only want to show the content that has the same numerical value in its suffix as the trigger element ID. And then we want to append the ID number to the content-string so that it matches the ID of the hidden element. After we do all of that, then we can use that derived string as the selector to toggle the hide class. Yeah, I'm quite sure I confused most of you. Let me paste the code and then explain it once more. We want to tell jQuery to listen to all the elements that have an ID that starts with the word trigger. When any one of them is clicked, we want to first call the hideAll function. The hideAll function adds the hide class to all the IDs with the word content in it. Then we want to take action on the ID attribute of the ID that was clicked. For example, the ID name could be called trigger-1, and this is what we would call a string. And what we want to do with this string is remove the trigger dash part of the string and leave everything after it. So in order to remove it, we decided to use the jQuery's replace method to replace the string with, well, nothing. An empty string. Yeah, you get the idea. There are other ways you can do this, but we just decided to do it this way because it's the simplest in my opinion. Also, it's easier to read. Okay, so the result of this execution is a numerical value, and we're storing it as a variable called ID. Then we create a dynamic selector by appending the variable ID to the string content dash. And then finally, we call the toggle class action on this derived selector. We know the hide class would be removed since it was already set by the hideAll function. It's a lot to wrap your head around the first time, but eventually you will get it. Anyways, let's delete the previous code, save it, and test. Great, we're almost to the finish line. Now comes the exciting part. Let's add another tab. Let's simply duplicate a trigger module and a row and change the numerical value for both the trigger and the content ID to 3. I'll make a few changes to the text to see if it's actually working. Also, let's remove the hide class from the first row since we don't really want it to be hidden when the page loads. Let's save it. Refresh. Awesome. Everything is working as it should. Now we'll add our subtitle. Insert a short subtitle into the first blurb, which is for the trigger. To make it appear only when you click on the blurb, we need to wrap it in a div or p tag and give it an ID. To add HTML syntax, we must first ensure that we are on the text tab and not the visual tab. Let's call the ID subtitle -1. Copy this element, paste it into our second blurb, and change the numerical value to 2. Now, since this element will be initially hidden, let's give it the hide class as well. Let's copy this element and paste it into the third blurb and change the numerical value to 3. Now, let's go back to our jQuery code to facilitate this element. So, when the trigger is triggered, we also want to toggle the hide class for the subtitle. All we have to do is copy and paste this line and rename this ID selector to subtitle. Then, within the hide all function, we do the same thing. Let's duplicate the jQuery for each loop and change the name from content to subtitle. That's all there is to it. Let's run some tests. Awesome. Let's continue. I hope you're getting a sense of how everything works. Let's add our spinning arrow now. To accomplish this, we must create a pseudo CSS class and apply it to our blurb module. Let's open our code module containing our CSS styles and create the pseudo class by typing .arrow : after. Now let's add our class properties. Give the content property the value 2, and then let's add an absolute position property. Set the right position property to 0 and set it to 30 from the top. This should align it to a reasonable spot that I think is okay to work with. Now let's change the font family to ET modules, which will render the numerical value as an icon. Allowing for a size of 30 pixels should suffice. Also, let's add a font color. I'll set it to black, and I'll also give it a subtle green text shadow. You are free to change it however you see fit. Finally, I'll use the cursor property to turn the cursor into a pointer. Next, let's add this class to our blurb, and we should see our newly styled icon showing up on our module. Go ahead and add the arrow class to all 3 blurbs. Next, let's add the animation. Let's make another class called rotate. And since this class will be targeting the same pseudo element, we will add : after to the class name. The transform property with the value rotate 90 degrees will be added next. Then we'll add a transition duration property of 0.3 seconds. Now, let's go over to our jQuery code. There are 3 factors to consider. First, when the blurb module is clicked, the arrow must be rotated. To target the arrow element, simply repeat the pattern shown here, replacing the selector with the word trigger. However, because the arrow is added to the blurb that is being clicked, we can also replace this with this. This instructs jQuery to target the clicked element and apply the rotate class to it. Next, when the hideAll function is called, we want to remove the rotate class. To accomplish this, we'll duplicate this line. Change the selector in the for each loop to target all IDs with the word trigger, and then remove the rotate class from each one. Finally, we want our first arrow to point to the content when the page loads. And since the first arrow will also be pointing up, we want to rotate it 90 degrees clockwise to the right when the page is loaded. So as a result, we'll put this code right at the top, right before the click function. We are going to target the first blurb, target -1, and add the rotate class to it. This will cause the arrow rotate clockwise 90 degrees when the page loads. That's all there is to it. Let's save and test again. Okay, great. Now you'll notice that the arrow does not animate back to its original position. To fix that, all we have to do is add the transition property to the arrow class. Let's do that and save, and then let's test again. Nice. Okay, now the next thing we want to do is add a background color to the module when the module is selected. To do this, we need to create another class and add it to the blurb when the blurb is active. Let's call this class active. Let's give it an appropriate background color, a radius of, let's say, 30 pixels. And let's give it a dotted border of 1 pixel. Also, let's give it a small padding. 6 pixels? Yeah, let's work with that. You can customize it however you want. Now let's add this class to our first blurb only, and then open up your jQuery code module. We want to duplicate this line for the rotate class and change the class name to active. Next, do the same thing within the hide all function. Copy this line, paste it, and then change the class name to active. Save and test. All right, that's all there is to it. All that remains is for us to clean up our code and tweak the UI slightly. But first, as promised, allow me to show you where we can get some really cool animated images for free. Go to lottiefiles.com and perform a quick search. Type any keyword you want. Click on the image. Change the background color to transparent by adding 0, 0 at the end of the hex value. Select a different color palette if you wish, and then click the HTML icon. Then turn off the controls by unchecking the controls checkbox, and then copy this code you see at the bottom here. Once it's copied, go back to your layout and let's replace the image module for a code module. Paste the code and let's set the width to 100% and the height to auto. Save this, and that's it. Our animated file should render on our preview page without any issues. Repeat this process as many times as you like. Now let's tidy our code. First, notice that each time you add a Lottie file, you will be copying this same script. So instead, what we will do is take this script and add it to the top of our jQuery code. Then all we have to do the next time we want to copy a Lottie file script is to copy only this part of the script and add it to our code module. All right, now let's do some tweaking. Notice when the mouse is hovering over the blurb, the text icon is showing. Let's change that to a pointer icon. Open your blurb module and go to the Advanced tab and add this CSS code to the main element. Let's do this for all of our blurbs. Now, since we've been working on our project, we've never really considered how it looks on mobile. Let's do that now. It looks fine, but the blurb module takes up too much space on the left for my liking. You are free to leave it as is, but I prefer to align it more to the left. To resolve this, set the default module width to 100. Change the default width of the content blurb as well. Now, let's save and preview our page once more. All right, last lap. Now let's foolproof our CSS and jQuery code. Copy all your CSS code inside the style tag and navigate to autoprefixer.github.io. Then, paste your code in the section on the left and it will autofix our CSS code to work on all major browsers. Copy this code and replace your old code with this one. All right, now let's go back to our jQuery code and type the following. Copy your jQuery code and paste it inside of the two curly brackets. This is a best practice to ensure that your code does not conflict with any outside code. And it also helps to prevent undesirable conflicts, especially if you are running a delayed JavaScript function with a caching plugin such as WP Rocket. All right, now let's save again and preview our code. Excellent. Well, you've reached the end of this tutorial. We did a lot. Congratulations. Thank you for watching and following along. You can get the entire code from the link in the description provided. Please subscribe and click the notification bell, as we are about to release a ton of new tutorials for you to learn to code with Divi. My name is Jamila. Happy coding!